refreshing it in the chat, right?
Mr. Stamper, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're coming up on near 7 o'clock. I'm going to share my screen on Zoom and call up the Pear Deck and let you manage the Zoom portion there.
Will do. And as Dr. Day gets going here, guys, if you have a question for me and you don't want to interrupt, because obviously there's a lot of people, you can just drop the question in the chat. I'm happy to try to help you, navigate things as we go through it here tonight. But if you have a question, just feel free to shoot one off to me. Appreciate it.
And for those of you who are on Pear Deck, you should see under the number 1 tells you to mute your microphone. 2, be sure your video feed is on. If you're comfortable with that. If you'd rather not, that's okay, but it's good for us to see faces as much as we can. And then also under 3, you have an initial prompt. To what extent was the Articles of Confederation influential in the formation of the United States Constitution of 1787? Looks like I have 35 of 75 responses. I've got 76 people, well, now close to 80 people signed on to Pear Deck. So that's most of us, I think. But if you have not yet signed on to Pear Deck, please do so. You'll see that the instructions in the chat. Go to joinpd.com and enter the code KKTWFC. Got a few more in the waiting room. We'll get them in, get them onto Pear Deck, and then we'll get started here in about another minute. Good evening once again to those who just came out of the waiting room and joined Zoom. Welcome. Please check your chat. You'll find instructions for joining the Pear Deck. It's joinpd.com. The code is KKTWFC. Thanks to everyone for being here. We'll have you for the next hour and 15 minutes. And tonight we're going to talk about the multiple choice and the short answer portions of the AP exam. Just as a reminder, exam is scheduled for May 5th, 2023. It'll be here before we know it, but appreciate the work you've put in thus far. This is the first of a series of study sessions that we'll all be conducting through the course of the year, and hopefully you'll get some reinforcement tonight. You'll get a little practice, and you'll hear some of the same instructions or advice you've gotten from your teachers, but you'll hear it from us. And so hopefully that will reinforce what they've been teaching you, and it'll be a good experience for us. So for this session, everybody should see the Pear Deck. I'm sharing my screen here on the Zoom. You log in to peardeck.com, enter the code, and you then can follow along and participate in the various exercises this evening. If for some reason you cannot get onto Pear Deck, or if you can't see the Pear Deck slides, please send Mr. Stamper a message in the chat, and he'll see if he can assist. Again, I'm Dr. Day. I teach at the University of Montevallo. I've been working on AP exams for 21 years and appreciate everybody being here. Mr. Stamper from Spain Park is helping me this evening on the back end of things, taking care of Zoom and chat and administration. Most of you know, I'm sure, that the multiple choice section usually is the first part of this exam. You get 55 multiple choice questions, and they're not just a series of questions, right? We have the prompts, so you have the stimuli, either verbal stimuli or some type of nonverbal or visual, whether that be a political cartoon or a map or a chart or a graph or something like that. Total, though, for each of those stimuli or for each prompt, you'll have anywhere from 2 to 5 multiple choice questions to answer in relation to that prompt. We have a couple of examples tonight that we'll work on that actually would come not so much from the prompt, but from general knowledge about the period addressed by the prompt. So we'll point those out when we get to them. But total 55 multiple choice questions. You'll have 55 minutes to answer those questions. So if you do the math, that means on average about one question per minute if you're keeping track. And it's good to have a watch or some type of timekeeping device so that you can kind of be sure you're still on pace. Also, the multiple choice portion counts 40% of the total score. So that's a whopping portion of it. The others add to it to make the 100%, but that means that when we're testing the content here, also reading comprehension, then this is an important portion of the exam. So we'll move on and have some examples and some practice samples here. In fact, we'll start with our first prompt. Please take a couple of minutes here, read through the prompt, and then go ahead and answer question 1 here. Pick your best answer on the Pear Deck. Still need about 25 responses. So keep reading, make your best choice here, A, B, C, or D. Give you about 10 or 15 more seconds to finish this one out. All right, let's take a look, see what we did here. Most people picked A, some picked C. All right, about half and half there. Some people picked B and D. And by the way, y'all, there's no reason to change your answer after the fact once you see what everybody else did. Just do your best shot here. We'll talk about the best answers here. The answer for this first question is A, racism. Okay, some picked the desire for wealth. That was the second largest choice. One thing I might point out too is anytime you get a prompt like this, be sure to look to see who it is, who is the source of the prompt. In this case, Bartolomé de las Casas. That should not be a stranger to you. You probably have read some things written by him. And of course, we get some information. You think, hey, I think I remember him. In defense of the Indian, he actually was a Catholic priest, and it tells us that here, who was advocating in his writings for the natives of the Americans. We see it here. We're about in the middle part of the 16th century. But essentially what's happening here, yes, there's a desire for wealth. That's a motivator for the Spanish conquistadors, right? But notice the essence of the question. Which of the following is the underlying cause of these Spanish actions here? We know that the Spaniards are here. Many of them are here for a desire for wealth, but we're really talking about the treatment of the natives in this case, and that has to do with a superiority complex, and so racism is the best answer. Okay, let's go on to number 2. We have the same prompt, but another question. Go ahead and take your best estimate on that one. About 25 more. Go ahead and take about 10 seconds to put in your answer. All right, let's see what we have here. Most people picked D, and that is the best answer. The address, his audience is the monarchs of Spain. Okay, some picked B and C. Let's go back and look. Roman Catholic Church. He is a member of the Roman Catholic Church, but that's really not who he's writing here. The church has its influence, has its place in Spanish colonial America, but there's not a whole lot that the church can do for this. He actually is their eyes, their ears, and their mouthpiece here. He's not writing to the conquistadors. Those are the ones who are doing it to the natives, right? The only group listed here that can affect this, that can affect policy and change the policy, are the monarchs of Spain. So D is the best answer here. Let's move on to a third question. Go ahead with this one. Same prompt. Take about 10 more seconds. Okay, good. Let's take a look. Take a look at this. Overwhelmingly, choice for C, right? A few picked B and D. Just a couple of folks picked A. Y'all, the best answer is B. Let's talk about this. If we think about multiple choice questions and the way they're crafted, usually there are two that we can throw away, right? Spaniards were sympathetic to the Native Americans. That is not what is described here, right? If anything, it's the exact opposite. There's very little sympathy for the natives. And then D says the Spanish faced strong resistance from the Native Americans. Obviously not, because they're dying in droves, right? So that brings us down to B and C as the two possible, best possible answers. If we look at C, which was the overwhelming choice here, European diseases were killing millions of Native Americans. That is a true statement. We know about smallpox, other diseases, no immunities on the part of the natives. That's a true statement. But look at the prompt. It says, which of the following factors is implied in the excerpt? Okay, so it's talking about this prompt, not about Spanish colonization in general. In general terms, this is a true statement, but it's not the diseases that are killing them here. It is maltreatment. It's hunger and that type of thing. So understanding that De las Casas is a priest and a social reformer, then the best answer here is B. The Catholic Church was trying to help the Native Americans. And just as you were building outposts and presidios as the conquistadors moved inland, so you would build missions and churches so that the priest went along to try to affect the treatment of the natives. Okay, if you have, hopefully you understand the difference there. So which makes B the better answer than C, even though it's a true statement. It is not derived from this prompt. Okay. Yep. All right, let's try a new prompt. Different time period, different place. We're now in North America, in New England. So read through this prompt and let's see what we can do with number 4. Take about 10 more seconds. All right, let's take a look. Now you're getting the idea. Yes, D is the best answer here. Just have a smattering on the other ones. Let's go back and look here. All right. Really, it's the idea they are surprised that Samoset and later Squanto could speak English and therefore dialogue with them and provide intermediary service between the colonists, English colonists here, and the natives. Okay. Very good on that one. Let's try another question, same prompt. Take about 15 more seconds. All right, let's take a look. Overwhelmingly for A, that is the best answer. Yes, Pilgrims were religious separatists looking for a place to freely practice their faith. They settled at Plymouth. We know later on we're going to get Massachusetts Bay about 9 years later. Those were Congregationalists, but all wanted to purify the Church of England. Notice this is one of those that I mentioned earlier. This is one of those questions in which the answer is not contained in the prompt. Rather, this is basic information that you know because of your understanding of the Pilgrims, of the settlement of Plymouth and the like. So they are separatists looking for the freedom to practice their faith as they see fit. Okay, let's try one more. I'm getting a little feedback. Please check to be sure your microphone is muted. Five or 10 more seconds. All right, let's see what we have. Overwhelmingly for D, a few people picked A, and then we have a smattering for B or C. Let's take a look at the possibilities. D, in fact, is the best answer, fishing. In fact, if you think about what brought folks were coming to North America or across the North Atlantic even before the colonization period because of the Grand Banks. The Grand Banks sit off of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, off the east there in the North Atlantic. And so it had been a great fishing spot all along. So that is the best answer. Others of you picked farming, but that's where we understand that New England is not going to become, Massachusetts and other parts of New England are not going to be known for their farming. Yes, they do subsistence farming so that they can grow enough crops to feed themselves, but because of the rocky soil, the fairly narrow coastal plain, you're not going to get a lot of farming production there. So farming is not the best answer. Mining, we really haven't talked about any mining operations in that area, so we can discount that one. Sometimes students will pick shipbuilding over fishing. Later, we know that New England is going to develop a shipbuilding industry. But what are we talking about? Here, when the Pilgrims settled, it was already then, by leading up to 1620, what was the primary importance of this area? It was fishing, and that will continue, which actually prompts the building of ships in that area as well. Okay, very good. All right, now we get a different prompt. We have a map. So take a look here, and also when you get a map, be sure to look at the title if it's there and what the legend tells you, and then make your best choice as far as the choices here for number 7. You're doing well. We'll take about 10 more seconds. All right, let's see what we have here. Most people picked C, a few picked A and D. C is the best answer. Let's take a look at this possibility. We look at the prompt and it tells us that we're looking at the British settlement up to 1700. So we go down to our legend and that tells us then that we're looking at the black areas. If you know your geography of the East Coast, you identify Cape Cod here. So that's Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, Boston, frankly, during this time period is going to be the main port. We come down here, here's Long Island. So we have New York, which is also a major port. Philadelphia sits down here in the southeastern corner of Pennsylvania. We have the coastline of Virginia along the Chesapeake Bay. And then down here on the coast of South Carolina is Charleston. And in fact, Boston, New York, like Philadelphia, and Charleston are the 4 largest cities in colonial America. And each one of them is a major port. So C here, the orientation of the British colonies toward producing commodities for export to Europe. Now, let me point out one thing. Some of you may not have known the definition of commodity. A commodity essentially is a trade good, okay? But whether you knew that term or not doesn't really matter because you can get the interpretation from the context, right? It's the producing something for export to Europe. And exports mean they're coming from the Americas to England. So we're talking about trade, commerce, that type of thing. And so C here, because we're focusing on the ports and shipping, C is the best answer. All right, same prompt, new question. You're quick on this one. Let's take 5 or 10 more seconds for the last few folks to finish up. All right, let's see what we have. Overwhelmingly for B. Hey, you smoked this question. Very good. B is the best answer. Increasing conflicts between the British settlers and American Indians. Frankly, we go back to our time frame here, okay? We've skipped this medium gray portion up to 1750. This is taking us all the way to 1775. So that means we're dealing with the black, the medium gray, and the light gray areas. So that includes then all of the area that's shaded, which takes us out to the Appalachian Mountains. And specifically, if we look at Virginia, that means we're out in the Blue Ridge, and you should be thinking Bacon's Rebellion, because that's where Nathaniel Bacon is. He's out here in conflict with the natives in this area, and that's what we're talking about here, about conflicts between the settlers as they moved inland against the natives as they encroach on their territory. Okay, very good. Let's take a look at another one based on this prompt. Answers aren't coming quite as quickly on this one. This one's requiring you to think a little bit more, but go ahead, see what you can discern and pick your best answer. Okay, let's take a look. Most folks picked A, fair number picked D, and a smattering of B and C. Actually, D is the best answer here, okay? Growth of social tensions between backcountry settlers and coastal elites. Remember on the previous question, I said when we talk about conflict between the settlers and the Native Americans, you should be thinking Bacon's Rebellion. In this question, you should be thinking Bacon's Rebellion. What did he do after attacking, having those conflicts with the natives back in the Blue Ridge Mountains? He then marched on Jamestown and ultimately burned that settlement, right? Then he died a month later, very inconvenient for him, right? But essentially what's happening here, he was arguing against Governor Berkeley because he said that Berkeley was favoring the people along the coast, the people who had the plantations in the James River Valley, as opposed to providing resources and protection for the folks in the backcountry. Okay, so D is the best answer. Many people, most people picked A, the development of economic differences between the northern and southern colonies. Notice that there is no distinction here between north and south, where actually the movement here is from east to west, okay? And so here's one thing that is important as well, and I've been talking to my students in my Colonial America elective here this semester, is that we're in the colonial period here. We can't stand in the present here in 2022 and look back at the colonial history through the lens of the Civil War. We do know that there ultimately are going to be differences, economic differences between northern colonies and states and southern colonies and states. But that is not what is depicted here. When we look at the time frame here, which is pre-Declaration of Independence, it's the East-West movement that's causing the conflict. And so both 8 and 9 address the issues that Nathaniel Bacon and his followers were dealing with. Native conflict on the frontier, and then not feeling like they were properly represented in the assembly, the colonial assembly, and by the colonial governor in the coastal region. Okay, so D is the best answer there. One more prompt. Here's the Sugar Act. We'll deal with this prompt, then we'll move on to the short answer question. Take about 10 more seconds. Very good. Most people pick D. That is, in fact, the best answer. Nice job on that one. For the first time, British Crown is levying taxes to raise revenue rather than regulating trade. This is where chronology comes in. And I know students often don't like to memorize dates, but dates can be helpful. In this case, we know that the Sugar Act 1764 follows 1 year after the end of the French and Indian War. And what's happening here is that Lord Grenville, the Lord of the Exchequer or the Treasury, is looking to raise revenue to pay the war debt incurred during the French and Indian War. And so this is the idea. You need to raise revenue. Many people picked A. Some of you did. Attempt to control colonial exports. Well, there had been some control mechanisms here. Frankly, A and C kind of go hand in glove because they're requiring the colonies to import English goods exclusively. Well, somewhat. Part of that had gone on with the Navigation Acts. You know, we have those series of 5 acts started in 1651, culminated in 1696, that actually put laws on the books to regulate North American imports and exports. But the Americans, all the American colonists, had trade going on with the West Indies as well. So trade was coming from all over, but the Navigation Acts were trying to centralize control during the late 17th century, but neither of those is as good an answer as D. And then, of course, B we throw away because we know we're in this time frame of no taxation without representation, right? And that's the whole issue, that the colonists had no voice in talking with Parliament because they did not have direct representation in Parliament. Okay, D is the best answer there. Let's do one more on this prompt. Take about 10 more seconds. Let's take a look. Most folks pick D. Yes, that is the correct answer. D is the one that is not true, is that Lord Grenville wanted to reward the colonies by extending salutary neglect. Frankly, with the taxation policies, there was no neglect and there was nothing salutary or friendly about it, right? And that's the whole issue we really find. With the end of the French and Indian War, we find the end of salutary neglect. Frankly, you're beginning to start enforcing many of those acts of Parliament that had been legislated over time, but had not been enforced. Now he's enforcing it. And in fact, the Sugar Act is really pretty much the Molasses Act of 1733, just revamped, updated, and now enforced. Okay, so D is the best answer there. Very good. Nice effort on the multiple choice. Let's move on then to our short answer questions. Ultimately, we know that we're going to see 4 short answer questions, but you will answer 3 of those. You have to answer question 1. That will come from periods 3 through 8. You have to answer question 2. That will come from periods 3 through 8 as well. Question 1 comes from secondary sources. Question 2 comes from primary sources. And then you get a choice between 3 and 4. No prompts there, just a question, but you get to choose. Question 3, number 3, comes from periods 1 through 5, and number 4 comes from periods 6 through 9. So depending on the question, depending on your expertise, your strength in one period or another, then you can make that choice of either 3 or 4, but ultimately you will write 3 SAQs. Okay, each of those will have 3 parts to them. So that means then that ultimately you will be writing 9 responses to the prompts on the short answer questions. You'll have 40 minutes to complete the short answers. So if you do the math, 9 responses, 40 minutes, roughly 4 minutes per response. Okay, for A, B, and C, each component of the 3 questions that you answer. All right. Your answers must be in complete sentences, no bullet or outline format, complete sentences, and they must fit within the rectangle, that the box that is drawn on the paper. Okay. The reason they do that is they scan your responses, and we need to be sure it fits on the computer screen. Okay. So anything that's outside the box, we do not score. We want you to think outside the box, but we want you to write inside the box. Okay. And as a general rule, we suggest that you have 2 to 3 sentences for each component. So part A, write 2 or 3 sentences answering that response directly. Move on to part B, 2 or 3 sentences to answer that. And in C, 2 or 3 sentences. Okay, let's look at some examples. So we mentioned the first short answer question will always contain a secondary source stimulus. Secondary sources are sources that are written by historians, essentially historians' interpretation of historical events. Okay, and in most cases, this format asks you to compare and contrast 2 opposite views that have been written by historians. Okay, secondary source is an historian writing about or interpreting historical event. So here is one excerpt from Dr. Crane's book, and one then by Dr. Zagari. Okay, read those 2 prompts and then respond to part A here at the bottom. Take a few more seconds to finish up here. Okay, most of you are doing pretty well here. Some of you got off to a good start, but then didn't continue very much. I always find this type of question, the part A to this one, can be a little bit awkward because it's set up for one historian to say one thing and for another historian to say something else. So you know that they're kind of arguing against each other on the same point, right? So to me, that's always kind of obvious. You say, well, Crane believes this and Zagari believes that kind of thing. So for example, one major difference between Crane's and Zagari's interpretations on how the American Revolution impacted women is the status women had. That's a good start. Crane, but then we go on to clarify. Crane believes the status of women was not changed, but Zagari believes that women benefited. For example, Zagari explains how women were now able to participate politically and viewed more important to society. You see how that second and third sentence kind of fleshes that out a little bit, providing some specifics. One major difference between Crane's and Zagari's historical interpretations of the immediate impact of the American Revolution on women was that Crane believed the revolution had no impact on women, while Zagari believed that the American Revolution had a significant impact on women. That's your basic argument there. Perhaps a little clarification would help. One major difference between Crane's and Zagari's interpretations of the immediate impact of the American Revolution on women was that Zagari believed the American Revolution aided the status of women, while Crane argued that it had no significant impact for the position of women in society. Okay, you're using good transition words there. When we talk about comparing and contrasting different viewpoints, some of you used while, whereas is a good word. Crane believes this, whereas Zagari argues thus and so. You can also say Crane believes this, but in contrast, Zagari argues the other. Or you can always use on the other hand. Crane's this, but on the other hand, Zagari argues thus and so. Okay, pretty good effort overall there. And by the way, some of you using examples here, I always think I've scored the SAQ for the last couple of years at the National Reading, and I think it's important to go ahead and read all of A, B, and C. We're kind of guiding you through part by part tonight, but look at what A, B, and C are asking, because there may be an example that if you're only answering A, you would use, but it might fit better in B or C as an example. So just kind of think about it from a holistic viewpoint, then go in and write each portion as you go. All right, let's take a look at part B. Same prompts. Now let's respond to B. Hey, can you stop just a minute? I want to point something out as I look at some of the responses that are coming up here. All right. here's the beginning of this. One event that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpts that could be used to support Crane's argument is, okay? That's what I have so far. Here's a second one. One event or development or circumstance from the period 1765 to 1800 that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpts that could be used to support Crane's argument is, and they mention women's right to vote, okay? That's a good example, but listen to the intro. One event, development, or circumstance from the period 1765 to 1800 that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpts that could be used to support Crane's argument is. Do you see what these responses have in common? They're actually restating the prompt. Look at how much time and how much ink is being wasted just really by rewording the prompt. One event, development, or circumstance from 1765 to 1800 that is not explicitly mentioned in the excerpts that could be used to support Crane's argument is. Do you see how much time you're wasting there? Why don't we just say, to support Crane's argument, the lack of women's right to vote shows the lack of women's involvement in the acceptance of women's involvement in the political process. Do you see how we can streamline that answer? You don't have to rewrite the entire prompt. The prompt is there. So respond to the prompt. Don't feel like you have to just turn it around and write it in your own words or in a different format, okay? We'll look at some examples here for that, but overall good. Let's try that streamlined approach as we look at C. And essentially what? That could be used to support Zagari's argument. Try that one.
You know what?
Please mute.
Mason Turner.
Please mute your mic. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about this just a minute. I saw Republican motherhood. I saw fighting in the Revolutionary War and supporting their husbands. Let's see, there was one other one. Yeah, somebody said the right to vote. Right to vote doesn't come until 1920. So that actually would support Crane's argument. And frankly, a lot of times, I mean, really, that's anytime you're prior to 1920, that would be a good exception to the rule for women, because the fact that they can't vote means that they are limited in their involvement in the political process. Some folks, I think, mentioned Abigail Adams. The idea here is that, you know, initially, we know the quotation to her husband, John, when she said, "Hey, remember the ladies." We actually could use Abigail Adams to support Crane to say, she said, "Remember the ladies," but they didn't, right? The male lawmakers did not. On the other hand, if you're trying to support Zagari, then you say, she said, "Remember the ladies." And even though there wasn't any direct legislation that enabled women to participate in the political process, still They influenced their husbands. Republican motherhood says they were training the next generation, supporting the values of the new United States and all of that type of thing. Okay, let's look at some examples here. You don't have to do the put the checks or anything like that, but here are examples that would earn credit for Part A. And again, we could use some of those linking terms like whereas, in contrast, or on the other hand. Then Part B. Here's the vote. That's always a key one, right? No political decision making. Here's the Abigail Adams idea. Here's the negative side of Republican motherhood. No legal rights for married women. And they were not allowed to fight, but we know that some did, right? So if you talk about those who did, then that kind of goes outside the social norm, but actually would support Zagari, would it not? And so if we take a look then at possibilities, let's see. Here's C. Yeah, Daughters of Liberty, homespun movement. Supported the rear areas within that, and then some people who were on the front lines. Here's Abigail Adams again, Republican motherhood. Some of you use that. Women's education. Somebody mentioned the academies for women so that they had opportunities, although still segregated, male and female. And the female education primarily focused on the domestic crafts and things like that. Still, you open the door for education for women. In the previous one, we used vote in New Jersey as the exception to the rule that women were not allowed to vote. Here, focusing solely on New Jersey, you can use that as a positive to support Zagari. And some other positives to support Zagari's argument. All right, we've talked some about how the short answer questions are scored. I think if you have any questions there specifically, you can send that to Mr. Stamper in the chat, but we're going to move on and look at some other examples here, okay? SAQ number 2, as we mentioned, includes a primary source. A primary source is an account of someone who was there, okay? Either a diary, personal journal, sometimes, depending on the source, a newspaper article. Think about Paul Revere's etching of the Boston Massacre, right? That's a primary source because he actually depicted that. It can be a map. Sometimes it can be a chart or something like that, so it can be a visual prompt as well, okay? Let's look at an example or so. Here we have a primary source. It is a map. Always when you have a map or a chart, read the title, look at the date, that might provide some clues, and then look at the legend to see what it is it's showing you, okay? So let's respond then to Part A. Remember, complete sentences, okay? Let's see how you do.
Bro, I'm back. Hey, something to study, bro.
Please be sure your microphone is muted.
Oh, my fault, my fault.
All right, at least you're having a good time. We appreciate your enthusiasm. Take about another 30 seconds. Okay, let me hit this again to be as concise and direct as you can. Okay, here's one that I see that says one specific historical event or development that contributed to the changes in land claims depicted is. That's restating the prompt. Okay, y'all, it's either an event or it's a development. You pick one. All right, here's one I like. Here's the next one. The French and Indian War contributed to the changes in land claims shown on the map because the British won against the French, leading to treaty negotiations in Britain's favor. That's pretty direct. And notice that it starts not with a historical event or a historical development or the map. It talks about what? The French and Indian War. That's the answer to the question. That's hitting the nail on the head. Okay, then explain how. Here, 1763, again, this is where chronology comes in, right? Somebody said that this shows that the European powers were trying to claim as much land in America as in North America as they could. Nope, we're past that. Okay, somebody else is talking about the Revolutionary War. Nope, not there yet. Okay, here's where time and chronology helps you. 1763 is the end of the French and Indian War. What do we see? This is the British before 1763 here on the East Coast, the original colonies, right? Gained by Britain. What? The Treaty of Paris, 1763, gives Great Britain everything east of the Mississippi River, to include Spanish Florida. But because the Spanish came in to aid the French, then they lose Florida, but they gain Louisiana from France. Napoleon's going to get that back so he can sell it to the United States in 1803, right? But this map depicts the settlement, Treaty of Paris, 1763, that ends the French and Indian War and eliminates the French colonial presence in North America and opens the way for British expansion, frankly, American expansion, American colonial expansion east to all lands east of the Mississippi, except for the proclamation of 1763 that's going to come. Okay? French and Indian War is what you ought to see in this one. Let's go to B. Okay, very good on this one. Many folks talked about increasing conflicts between the American colonists and the natives. That's good. In fact, that's why you drew the proclamation. The king drew the proclamation of 1763, that line along the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, right? Somebody even mentioned that and said, well, that then increased the animosity of the colonists in relation to Great Britain. Exactly right. Okay. Now, let me point out one point, because some folks mentioned the Revolutionary War. Somebody mentioned it led to independence. Yes, it did. This led to independence, but notice the time frame here: 1763 to 1775. 1775, major event, Lexington and Concord, right? But we don't get the Declaration of Independence until 1776. And so maybe you could draw to Lexington and Concord, the beginning of the Revolutionary War, but what is it that spawns that? It is the animosity between the colonists and Great Britain. But to talk about the Revolutionary War or independence, we're not there yet. We're not going to get there until July 4th, 1776. Okay? So be sure to pay attention to the time frame. And then how about C? All right, very good. We probably exhausted this. And I answered some of this for you initially when I said, France is out, Spain is in Louisiana. That's some of the changes going on, but France is gone as a colonial power in North America. I liked what somebody wrote here. They said it actually generated the taxation, which goes back to some of those multiple choice questions, the prompts there that we were talking about with the Sugar Act and all that kind of stuff. But it mentioned that as a result of this, then Great Britain started taxing the colonists to help pay for this because of the spoils of war and things like that. That's a good treatment of this, okay? But really, when you see this and look at the dates and you see 1763, you ought to be thinking Treaty of Paris, 1763, end of the French and Indian War. What does that do? How does it change the colonial picture in North America? Okay, very good. All right, we're going to, we'll skip these examples here. Let's talk about questions 3 and 4 before we wrap up, okay? Again, you're not going to get a prompt. You're not going to get secondary source. You're not going to get primary source. You're really just going to get a direct question, and you get to pick one. For example, briefly explain one important difference between the Chesapeake region and New England from 1607 to 1754. Try that one right quick. We'll just take a few seconds and let you respond to that one. Okay, very good. What I'm seeing here primarily is difference in trade. You're dealing with tobacco in the Chesapeake. You're dealing with fishing in New England. You also have the Puritan influence among the communities of New England, whereas you don't have that structure in the Chesapeake. So any number of those is fine. And then you're going to get, the next part is look for a similarity between those two regions. Okay, so this is the style of question that you're going to get in either questions 3 or 4. You pick one, and again, question 3 comes from periods 1 through 5. Question 4 comes from from periods 6 through 9. You pick one and answer A, B, and C for that. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to send us a question in the chat or stick around afterwards. Mr. Stamper and I'll be here. We'll be glad to talk to you if you have a question you'd like to ask directly. And then here's another practice, but we won't have time for that. What we'd like for you to do as we finish up, first of all, I'll thank you for your effort tonight, for your participation on both the multiple choice and the short answer. If you will, before you go, click on this link, give us some feedback on that Google form. And then once you've completed that form, you can sign out of Pear Deck and sign out of Zoom. Look forward to seeing you maybe later on in the academic year, and good luck in your studies as you prepare for that AP exam. Keep up the good work hard, and keep thinking straight, okay? Thanks again for being with us this evening.
Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Day, for leading us through the session. Just so you guys know, I put the link of that form in the chat in the Zoom as well, just in case you, for whatever reason, can't work the link on the screen. But thank you all for being here tonight, and stay aggressive with this, stay hungry, and chip away at it. And hopefully we'll run across you again in the future. I appreciate your effort tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Day.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Day, the G.
Beg your pardon?